Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody that's joining us for this webinar from ShariaCrimeStoppers.org. We're very grateful that you've joined us this evening and that so many of you, well over 300 people, are joining us. My name is Katie Hopkins. I'm a British journalist. Sean Hannity calls me the gobby one, which I think is a little bit rude, actually, because I do talk quite a lot. But the reason I'm here in Michigan and the reason I'm talking to you on this webinar, kindly hosted by @theunitedwest.org, is because I wanted to come to you with a warning. And my warning to you as Americans and as many other people joining us across actually the whole of the globe is to say, do not let yourselves fall as we in the UK have fallen. Do not let yourselves become what we in the UK have become. And I should say very clearly that I love my country. You know, I'm a true patriot. I joined the military straight from university. I had a 35-year regular commission that I had to leave early, but for the intelligence corps. So I have that as my heritage. I'm not here to talk my country down. I'm super proud of all the things about the country that I love. But it has become very clear that we have become a fallen nation. And over the next hour, I'd like to share with you my experiences in the UK. So in the first 15 minutes that you're with me for this hour, I'd like to share with you my thoughts really on the state of Britain and no-go Europe. So I spend a lot of time on the road traveling, no-go zones, the places I'm not supposed to go. And I would like to share some of my learnings with you in case it's helpful for you. In the second 15 minutes, so from 7:15-ish, seeing how we go, I would like to talk to you about how the state supports the managed decline of the UK and Europe. Managed decline is an interesting idea, I know, but for us, certainly, our state, our establishment is very comfortable managing the decline of our countries. And from 7:30 until 7:45 in that third section, and what I would like to do is update from here in Michigan. I've been here for the last few days. I've been in Dearborn, I've been in the east side, some of the tougher areas of Detroit, and I've spent some time in the housing here that's not been at all looked after. Some of the burnt out shells, the streets where houses are falling down right opposite other people with homes. And some of my learnings there, particularly with regards to the mosque. I was inside the largest mosque in America here in Dearborn. I'd like to share my learnings with you, and also having met the lovely Senator Patrick Colbeck, some of my concerns about the way he's being positioned. And in that final 15 minutes, if you'll hang on in there with me, I'd be grateful. We will have a Q&A session, and I will get to as many questions as I can. Do feel free to ask me anything. One of the lucky things about me being A, older, B, British, and C, I've got the skin of a rhino, some say, is that you can ask me anything and I am impossible to offend, although you might be able to change that this evening. Someone might be able to offend me. But on the bottom of your screens, you should be able to see a Q&A button. So if you want to click on that, log your questions. You can ask questions all the way through. In that last 15 minutes, I will get to as many of your questions as I can. So please do ask anything you would like to ask. So right now, I will press on with the first part of my webinar presentation to you, if I may. Each of my sections that we're going to talk about comes with a clip that I'd really like to share with you. And the purpose of these clips, they're from my journeys around this crazy world of ours. I think they help to kind of give some kind of context to the sorts of things I'm hoping to share. Maybe just 2 minutes about myself, if that's helpful. If I'm a stranger to you on your screens, I'm here in a hotel room just outside Dearborn in Detroit. I'm here. I've got a camera team of 2, kindly provided to me by my employer, Rebel Media. They're a conservative news outlet in Canada. And surprisingly, Canada still has some conservative voices. So much of the footage I'm going to share with you and the footage I'll be posting on hopkinsworld.com over the next few days. That comes courtesy of the brilliant team at Rebel Media, and I do commend them to you. I am just a mum of 3 kids in the real world, and my children are 14, 13 and 9, girl, boy. And really my heart and the reason I fight now in the way that I do, the reason I do these journeys to some of the more difficult places on the planet where we are beaten up or attacked or routinely come under some kind of duress because of the stories we're trying to tell. The reason I'm doing that actually is because of my daughters and my son. But for my children, I would really like it if they could grow up in the country that I used to know and the country that my granddad fought for. And that's really the reason I do what I do now and carry on my fight, which started in the military and is now more in the media, is to try and help other people see the threats that I see coming to the United States. So first up, if I may, I would like to talk about the state of Britain. So in that word, the state of Britain, I mean the state of disrepair that we've fallen into in the UK, and then extend that a little to other no-go zones that I've travelled and reported from extensively over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Many of you will know that the UK is in quite a state at the moment. We have the highest murder rate that we've ever had for decades. And in fact, recently our murder rate overtook that of New York. That's unheard of. In London, which I like to call Londonistan because it's now a city I barely recognise anymore. I certainly don't see many people that represent a Britain I used to know. Many of the areas around London, if you imagine London as a clock face with a clock dial around it, some of the areas, say from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, if 0 to 5 is Tower Hamlets, a particular area of London, that's almost 95% Muslim. And in the next area, Newham, I think that's about 86% Muslim. So what I'm trying to allude to here is that there is a very high density population of Muslims in London and in the areas, in the voting areas of London. And of course, that's not problematic in itself. None of us have got anything against a particular religion or a particular population. I don't mind who comes to my country if they want to work hard and play fair and contribute. But of course, what we were sold in the UK, as with much of Western Europe, we were sold an ideal. We were sold an ideal of multiculturalism, of diversity. We were told that diversity is our strength. And of course, we haven't seen that at all. What we've ended up with is a series of monocultures. And in London, the monoculture is the Muslim culture. And it is a very pervasive culture indeed. And what it means, of course, is that our London mayor, Sadiq Khan, has a guaranteed voting bloc in London. He won, I believe, by 400,000 votes. And that dense population, which increases in density each year, and votes according, in my view, to religion by religious lines as opposed to by maybe democratic lines in the sense of policy, that is something that I am afraid of. And what we've seen in the UK is that template for achieving power repeated throughout the UK. So the majority of mayors in the UK, M-A-Y-O-R-S, if my accent is confusing, I know that word sounds strange when I say it, mayors. The majority of mayors in the UK are Muslim. And they have, what would you say, worked out that once you become a mayor in the UK, you have access to policing, you have access to the budgets that control how the city is made up, you control what is spent where, and of course you have the ability to favour a population that will then vote for you. So, if I give an example, a concrete example in the UK, we have Muslim-only housing that is supported by the London Mayor. People like myself, were I to live in London exclusively, would be excluded from applying for that housing. I mean, they make a notional idea that I could apply, but of course the board that permits people to apply for housing in London, in the Muslim housing, is all Muslim men. So in that way, what you can do if you're the mayor is you can get additional housing, you can fill it with more people who are going to vote for you, and of course their gratitude to you means that you are bound to secure their votes. And you might say, so what? Why do I care? Why does this matter in America? But if I give the example here in Michigan, where you start to see people voting according to perhaps their religion as opposed to policy or pragmatic ideals for what might make America better, I think that's a concern. And what we've seen in the UK, of course, is that once one is enabled and establishes power and a process for achieving that power and a process for achieving budgets that enable spending, which then attracts votes, you will see that template repeated over and over and over in the United States of America, just as we've seen that in the UK. And if I can give an example from a more emotional context of what that means, I get emails all the time. My email, if you want it, is katie@katiehopkins.co.uk. I try and read my own emails, and my husband, lovely Mark, helps me to make sure that nobody is ignored. But I get a lot of emails from elderly men and women, and they say that they are glad that their time in the UK is nearly up because they do not want to live to see their country fall. And those are very hard emails for someone like me to respond to as a regular mum. And interesting, actually, I get a lot of emails. My radio show was actually the biggest audience I had was young people, 16 and 17-year-olds. And it seems like at these two ends of the axis, we have people who despair because they no longer have a voice, because the young people feel they can no longer say what they feel because they're kind of held back, because they're supposed to buy into all of the liberal ideology that they are spoon-fed. And certainly in our schools, there is one way of thought that is allowed. In my children's state schools, there were 2 trips to the mosque in one term alone, and Christmas was cancelled. We had to talk about a winter festival. Instead, needless to say, my children were removed from that school. What I think we see a lot of as well, of course, is the censorship of conservative voices like my own. I was due to be on a radio station actually in Detroit this week, but was removed with 5 minutes notice because I believe they received a call from someone on the outside to say, no, her views are not acceptable. And this silencing is something we see a lot. And the silencing happens in a number of ways, sometimes with threats and intimidation. 2 jihadis threatened to chop off my head in 2017, and there was a plot to behead me by 2 jihadis. Unfortunately, that plot was foiled. And fortunately, that plot, those 2 jihadis were sent to prison. But those are the threats that we face. And what I'd like to do now, as something that's indicative of the silencing that we face, is I would like to share with you a clip. This was at a free speech event held in Hyde Park. And at this free speech event, I was undercover. I wasn't showing my face. I had a big hood on, had a big scarf on, and I just went there to show boots on the ground because there were a couple of journalists, you may know their names, Lauren Southern and Brittany Pettibone. They were prevented from entering the UK on the basis of future hate speech as yet unsaid. I'll just repeat that. They were prevented from coming to the UK on the basis of future hate speech as yet unsaid. And in kind of protest against this, I went to Hyde Park. I went undercover, but I saw a gentleman being attacked by a mob, so I got involved. So what I'd like to do now, if I may, is play you a clip that I have. It's a very brief clip of me at Hyde Park trying to defend a gentleman who was being attacked by the mob and indeed stand up for Britain and our right to have the country that so many elderly people feel that they are going to lose. So we're going to play that clip for you now, if we may.
Trying to shut your free speech down, this lot.
Amen. This woman is a hero. Yeah, amen.
And we have had enough of being tiptoed.
They're not my people.
You're a kid,
This
you know
is not what
nothing.
we fight for.
You know nothing, mate. I've worked in war zones, you know nothing.
Stand up for
You know
Britain,
nothing
and
what's
that
coming
is
to
what
you.
we do.
I've worked in them all.
And none of
And
that
believe
crap.
me, what's coming,
None of
you
this
ain't
crap.
fucking
None of
happy.
Freedom of speech. This is the youth for today. Look at the youth for today. Listen, you don't want to listen. You rather
Well done, Katie Hopkins.
Thank you very much for watching that clip. So, you'll see the sort of stress points we're under when you're surrounded like that. But it's really important, I think, for someone like me to keep speaking out. And you'll know from the silencing that happens that the more of us that still have that voice, we continue to sort of speak for others perhaps, or at least represent others, even if we don't necessarily say precisely what they think, who don't really have an ability to speak out anymore. Now, in this next section, I wanted to address with you how politicians and the state support managed decline. And what I mean by that principle is this idea, we imagine somehow that our politicians are fighting for us, that they're fighting for a better country, that they have our best interests at heart, that all the promises they make to us on the campaign trail are somehow going to come true, or that they're always going to stand up for what might be best for our country. And so many people ask me, how is it the case that actually Europe has been allowed to fall, or that Londonistan is able to have a murder rate higher than New York, or that we continue to have open borders where so many people can flood through into our country? And what I have to explain is, sadly, the state, our government, our politicians, and the establishment make as much money, find it just as profitable and as politically lucrative in terms of winning votes to steadily manage the decline of our country as they do to try and push it forwards. And I would say that's the opposite of what Donald Trump is trying to do here in America. Donald Trump stands there on the platform of making America great again. And sadly, in the UK, we don't have anybody saying that message. We only have leaders prepared to bend down and be submissive to a culture that seems determined to take over the place that they chose to join. If I give a few concrete examples, in many areas in the UK, and I've received emails direct from police officers, serving police officers about this, police officers say that imams in the mosques in certain areas where Sharia is the predominant and accepted policing in the UK, the imams are selecting the police officers allowed to patrol in those areas. And I think if you think about the way that the establishment then are linked with the police force, which are linked with the mosques, you start to see how Islam can truly take a stronghold in a country like mine. We also have new laws in place. They've just been introduced. And those laws for someone like me, 6 years inside, 6 years in prison for someone like me who has a relatively large social media following, if I say anything that's considered to be hateful against the religion of Islam. Now, of course, I'm not out here to say anything hateful. It's not my message to say anything that involves hate. But if someone perceives that my truths should be hateful, they can report those to the police, and the police can prosecute me. And the threat is that I can spend anything up to 6 years inside. And I have been, of course, challenged by the police on a number of occasions. I was interviewed by the Major Crime and Homicide Command for a 500-word article in a national newspaper that had already gone through our editorial and legal team. And for example, in another way that we're censored as voices, Fox News, that's been taken off the air in the UK. It's not seen as appropriate for UK audiences. And I think my American friends tend to find that a little hard to believe. And also our state broadcaster, the BBC. You know, we had this idea, many people did, that they kind of looked up to the BBC. That it was this kind of bastion of reporting truths. And I don't see it that way anymore. You know, our state broadcaster has a specific agenda. So with the royal wedding that I'm sure many of you have been watching today, a couple of weeks ago, the state broadcaster asked for lesbian, gay and transsexual couples that were getting married on the same day as Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to come forward and share their stories. I have no problem with that, but that's the sort of agenda the BBC has. It's always about the breakdown of the traditional family unit and rather trying to promote something of the other, something that rips apart the fabric of the society that we think is important and then makes us dependent on perhaps a religion or more likely the state. And the other curious thing about the UK, when you think about the fact that we turned away journalists at our border, Canadian and American journalists at our border on the basis of future hate speech as yet unsaid, is that of course we welcome back returning jihadis to the UK with open arms. Somehow they're called victims. Somehow if you went and fought for Syria, you're a victim in the UK and you should be embraced and welcomed back. In fact, we almost went as far as bribing these individuals with housing and schools. 462 jihadis we welcomed back into the heart of Britain. And then we wonder why our children are terrorised and why we end up with no-go zones in the heart of cities that were once civilised. I recently travelled to Molenbeek in Belgium. Now, many of you will think of Brussels and Belgium, and you will think of the EU, maybe of men in suits, of people, this kind of administrative powerhouse of the EU. The place that I went to is called the jihadi capital of Europe. And basically, if there's ever been jihadi activity, it happens there. That is the heartland of jihadi terror. And in Molenbeek, when I was there, I was walking around investigating. I wanted to find out some of the truths of this place that so many are fearful of going to. It's only about a 4-mile squared area. It's a really small area, 6 kilometres squared, so very small. But in that one area, in that 6 kilometre squared area, there are 22 mosques. There are only 5 official mosques, and the rest are unofficial mosques. And what they mean by unofficial mosques, they're kind of people's lounges or living rooms probably just like this, that are mosques. And what it means by unofficial, it means they're not policed, they're not regulated, there is no sense of who the imam is, who might be preaching there. And so what is being preached there and the sort of teachings that are happened there, those aren't known either. And that's going on right now in the centre of Belgium. In fact, the biggest mosque, it's called the Great Mosque, the Grand Mosque of Belgium, that was given to the Saudis on a 99-year rent-free lease. It was given to them for free on the basis that there would be cheaper foreign oil in return. So you can already see where the money is coming from that's being channeled back into the politicians that enable this to happen, that enable the managed decline that we talked about. And so this mosque, because it was given to the Saudis rent-free, they were able to bring in whichever imam they wanted. And so they brought in an extremist imam from Egypt who was preaching the most violent form of Islam that there is. Politicians, some of the decent conservative politicians in Belgium tried to deport that imam, but that was overturned. And so what I'm trying to paint for you is this picture where not only do we hand over the borders of our countries and allow a complete overthrow of one population by another, but we also then allow those in who will teach an extremist form of Islamic belief, a fundamental form of Islamic belief. And then we wonder why we end up with jihadis in our midst. It's absolutely no surprise to me. And as part of my time in Molenbeek, investigating the no-go zones where other people refuse to tread, I bumped into the mayor, which was not her best day on record, I think slightly unfortunate for her. And she was the mayor, and to my mind, she has completely turned a blind eye to all of the things that are happening in the small area that she's responsible for. She is responsible for the safety and security of the people in that town. And yet she has presided over a period where it's been known as the jihadi capital of Europe. And interestingly, or perhaps not interestingly, but more in a more sinister way, in October 2015, she was given a list of suspected jihadis known to have purchased equipment for use in the making of bombs. She was given a list of jihadis suspected of engaging in terrorist activities, and she was alerted to the imminent threat. She was given that list, and yet she did nothing. And 1 month later, from Molenbeek, Salam Abdeslam went out into Paris and coordinated the Paris attacks. You may well remember the Paris attacks of November 2015, in which 130 people died and a further 400 or so were maimed. That was the night that the Bataclan attack happened. You'll remember there was a concert and men stormed that building with automatic weapons, which you'll recall we don't have the right to guns in Europe, but yet still we're attacked with automatic weapons. She was given the name of that man a month before and she did nothing. And when I said to her, "You did nothing?" she said, "It was not my job." And my concern for America and my concern for places where Muslims will get into power, it's nothing to do with the religion. It's the fact that politicians are willing to turn a blind eye and create these blind spots in our countries. They say blind spots like it's a harmless thing. We have this ability to use words that make things sound harmless, don't we? We use the word grooming gangs for rape squads as if they're going to somehow do some kind of grooming and make people look better and do their hair. You know, these blind spots are actually places where terrorists are able to establish and make plans. And worse than that, the terrorist responsible for the Paris attacks also went back to Molenbeek and was hidden by the people of Molenbeek for a further 4 months before he was found by the police. It was one of the largest manhunts in history. What I'd like to do now, if I may, is share with you a clip from my time in Molenbeek. And this, the person that I'm introducing you to here is the mayor of Molenbeek, who told me that to police the problem was not her job. If we could play that clip now, I'd be very grateful. But were you told that Salah Abdeslam was a suspected terrorist in Molenbeek? Were you given that list? Were you given that information in October 2016, 15?
Yes. Well, we had a list, but this list was known. It was not the job of the local police to follow those people. This is the job of the federal police, and still now it's the job of the federal police.
But if 130 people died and 415 people are injured, if that was my daughter and you said, but it wasn't our job, I would really feel angry at you, wouldn't I?
Yes, of course, and many people were angry.
Still angry, every day.
People were angry.
Are angry.
About what's happened.
So that was me, I wouldn't say accosting, because she did come over to me actually, and she told me not to sit on the filthy seats, which I suppose begs the question why she doesn't clean the seats up in her town either. But to hear her say it was not my job, I actually found it very emotional, and was very upset straight after, because as a mum, again, I go back to that as my source of reference every time. As a mum, if that was my daughter, and that's how I always see all of these attacks, if that was my daughter, imagine a woman looking at me and saying, it was not my job. And then saying, well, it was okay, they weren't terrorists, they were jihadis, it was not my job. And my point about this clip further, the so what, always ask yourself, so what? We can be shown a lot of clips these days. So what? The so what is, she turned a blind eye, I would say, because she was prepared to sacrifice the safety of our daughters in order to secure the Muslim vote. And interestingly, and probably not interesting actually, probably it's much more sad, there's a competition, you know, for the best mayor in the world. The best mayor in the world. And guess whose name is up for best mayor in the world? That mayor there that told me it's not her job to do anything about the jihadis that live right next door to her. because she has more interest in securing the voting bloc. And I guess the message for America is, you see how this is circular. If you allow someone to come in who needs the Muslim voting bloc to secure their position, what you will see is a turning of a blind eye to certain things, and worse still, a failure to act when people's safety is at risk. And that's really the thing I want to highlight with you, and the reason I travel to these no-go zones, because it doesn't matter what they call me. They call me the same things they call you. They call me a Islamophobe, they call me a bigot, they call me a racist, they call me a xenophobe. I'm none of those things. I went to South Africa to understand why black and white farm workers are attacked when farm workers are attacked. I don't see colour. But when they apply labels to me, the best way we have of fighting back very often is to show our truths. So just a reminder for people joining us right now, there's a link that you've received on your email when you signed up. If you want to share that with your friends, you can push that link out right now. They can come join us, come join this conversation. Everybody is welcome. We're very grateful to be hosted by Sharia Crime Stoppers. And if you want to see more about them, they are at theunitedwest.org. So you can find more about them there. My name is Katie Hopkins. I'm a British journalist. Some of you may see my face. Some people see me. You may have seen me on Tucker or heard me on Hannity. Other people bump into me in the street and they think maybe I work in the local hospital because my face is kind of familiar, but they don't know why. So that might be where you've seen me. Or if you've not seen me at all, I would say that, you know, all I have ever been is a mum, and an interested mum in standing up for her daughters. The screen you're seeing there now is for people, if they want to come still and register and join us, you go to theunitedwest.org/Sharia-crime stoppers, Sharia-crime stoppers. So that's where you go if you want to share the link. If anybody wants to join us, I would also like to alert you, the time is now 7:31. We'll be stopping this webinar promptly at 8 p.m. But in this last quarter of an hour, from 7:45 until 8 p.m, we'll be taking your questions. I'll be answering as many questions as I can. We'll do a quick question fire and answer session. So if you look on the bottom of your screen, don't be afraid of this thing. If it all crashes out, rejoin us. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. If you click on that Q&A, you can put your questions in. I'm impossible to offend. Ask me anything you want about the UK, the fall of the UK, no-go zones, what it means for America, or even challenge what I think. If you disagree with stuff I've said, please say. You know, I would always say for so many of us, the one thing we don't want is to have to agree to be able to have a conversation. Agreement should never have been a precursor to any debate. It really frustrates me actually when people say, oh, well, you know, I really love you. I don't agree with everything you've got to say, but I really love you. And I always want to say to them, I never asked you to. I never asked you to agree with anything I said. I'm delighted that you're here. I'm delighted that we're having a conversation. And if you told me you hated everything that came out of my mouth, but at least we were here chatting, that suits me perfectly fine. I think it's when we're shutting down the conversation, I think that's where I see a concern. And I think the fact that we see the silencing of conservative voices, is something that concerns me greatly as well. Now, in this next section, if I may, having spoken to you about the state of Britain in terms of the decline of Britain, having spoken to you about the managed decline and the way that our police and our establishment and our state broadcaster is complicit in the decline of our country, given the example of the mayor there of Molenbeek in Belgium, and of course Sweden is set in exactly that same way of, you know, they're on that same trajectory. Sweden really is a fallen country. I've spent some time in the no-go zones there, Rinkeby, and I have to say those are some of the most violent territories that I've had the displeasure of being part of. What I want to do in this next quarter of an hour, if I may, is talk to you a little bit about my observations here in Michigan and Detroit. I apologise if you find them to be unfair. I would say that I have only been here for 3 or 4 days, so I accept that I am very much an outsider, but with my experiences from Western Europe, I just wanted to share some of my observations that I found here on the ground. And looking at your race for governor, you know, I think there are alarm bells that ring for me. I do have concerns. and I believe I say these in a non-partisan way. Clearly, I'll call my hand. I'm a massive Trump supporter. I'm a massive Brexiteer. People call me the female Farage for a reason, or the British Ann Coulter, but I'm a massive Trump supporter. But my warning for Michigan is that I see you headed. You're way above us. You're in a much better place than I'll ever be in the UK. Being in the UK is like being in a cold shower, and here's like being in a warm bath. But you are headed on the trajectory that I am already a very long way down, and I don't wish it upon anybody, not my enemies. And so I say here in Michigan, the race for governor, I think, is going to take on global significance. I have seen that the Muslim Democratic candidate, as I believe he will be, let's see what happens in the primary, but I believe looking at the forces that are aligning at a deep level in the establishment, I believe whatever happens, he will be the Democratic candidate, and I will sit here and apologise if I've called that wrong. But if I look at the way the forces are aligning, and with my experience, he will be the candidate. And what I would say about Abdul El-Sayed is I see the same things happening here that I've seen happen over and over and over in the UK. First up, financing. Wherever you see power and the concentration of power, particularly in the hands of the mosques, there is a great deal of finance. I was inside your biggest mosque in Dearborn, the Islamic Center of America, I believe it's called. 3,000 people can fit in there. The minarets, as you know, are 10 stories tall. I was inside the mosque. I'll be bringing you a report from inside the mosque that will be hosted at hopkinsworld.com. We'll make sure we share it here with you. But my two observations inside of that mosque, one was the wall, the sort of wall of fame, the hall of fame, if you will. Images of the Imam historically with Carter, images of the Imam with George W. Bush, images of the Imam with Muhammad Ali, a kind of celebrity wall of fame, if you will, and political wall of fame, reminding people of the power of the mosque in Dearborn and the power of the Muslim community. The second thing I noticed was a room where donors and big donors were flagged up on the wall, framed prints of donors and how much they'd given, and there were big numbers on those inside those frames. And what I noticed when I take that as a kind of template for the gubernatorial race here in Michigan is the amount of donations that are coming in for Abdul El-Sayed from outside of your state. And that concerns me greatly. Because once donations start coming in from outside, I'm reminded of that mosque in Belgium, which was given to the Saudis for funds to flow through in order for them to install the imam that they wanted, in order to preach a very extremist form of Islam and to carry on changing the nature of the country to a Muslim country. And be aware, in Belgium, the Islam Party is formalised and established. It has 2 candidates already elected and will be posting 28 candidates in the next election. That's the Islam Party, and their policies are segregation on buses, halal foods and covered women. That is in Belgium right now. So what I'm trying to say to you on this trajectory is I see the money flowing to Abdul El-Sayed from outside of Michigan State, and I see Linda Saussure pushing money towards the campaign, and I see him escalating his campaign not to be about Michigan. His campaign is now escalated to be against Trump. So if you dislike Trump, vote for me. And where, at what point do the regular families of Michigan that I spent time with yesterday in some of the very rundown areas facing homes that are burnt out and destroyed, where do their voices get heard in that? When you start talking about making this against Trump, when you have 42% of your funds coming in from outside the state, when you have the mosque backing you, the imams telling you that it's Allah's will that you back Abdul El-Sayed, when he starts telling other gubernatorial candidates that they are hated by the Muslims, at what point does the lady I spoke to, an African-American lady in Detroit, living opposite a burnt-out shell of a house with her little son, Demetrius, where do they get a voice? Where do their concerns about the road that they can't even drive down because it's in such a state of disrepair, where do they get a voice? And she can't rebuild her fence because the grass is too long, because the state hasn't come to cut her grass because it can't afford it. Where do they get a voice? And where does she wants to start a petition to try and get the house opposite her at least knocked down because she's scared for her child because of the glass and the state of disrepair of the place. I clambered amongst those houses. We'll bring you those reports too. Where does she get a voice when Abdel al-Sayed is making this about a vote against Trump? And that's what makes me so upset, is for mothers and their children here in Michigan who deserve better. And you know, I was fortunate enough to spend time with Patrick Colbeck. And to me, it doesn't matter which candidate you vote for. I'm not questioning your loyalties at all. But my observation, having spent time with Patrick, is he's a very regular guy. He's a lot more intelligent than I am. I'll point that out for sure. But he's a very regular guy. He's very like me or you or the next guy. He's had a regular job. He told me he didn't even want to be a politician. In fact, it's his least favorite job of all time. And that fills me with great hope, because you know what? He didn't even want to be in the gubernatorial race, but he feels it's his job. He feels it's his duty. And I really identify with that. It's probably the same reason I'm here rabbiting on at you, Poll Souls. I feel it's my duty to stand up for what's right. And what I notice about both Patrick and myself, and I'm sure other candidates would want to share with this, but particularly with Patrick, having spoken to him and met him in person, and I recommend you to do the same. It's always great to speak to people in person to understand them. The media say I'm a complete monster, and I'm pretty sure I'm not. But meeting him in person, what I see is a man who's prepared to stand up and defend people like me, women, the rights of women to be uncovered. You know, even to go inside that mosque, I had to put a scarf on my head. And inside that mosque, I was told I needed to sit at the back of the room, because if I was to be in front of men, I might distract them in their prayer. And that's a terribly sad thing for me. I mean, I don't see myself as a sexual object. I'm sure none of you do either. But it would be it would be a big ask. But what I'm trying to say is, at no point do any of us women see ourselves as sexual objects first. We have a lot more to offer. But that's how Muslim people seem to see us. Certainly that's the messaging I got from the mosque. And certainly I would like to say that Patrick is somebody who is standing up for women and your daughters and people like me who just want the regular things in life. I don't see him as on the attack at all. I see him rather as a defender. And I think what we all need to rally around is somebody that's speaking up for your state. You know better. I don't know your state, but I do see the rundown houses. I do see the roads that need mending. I do see that you have real engineering issues that could do with a pragmatic policymaker who knows about process, and I see that in Patrick. Maybe you can see it in someone else. But I do have a real fear for you if you go down the line of taking on somebody who's achieving finances from outside of your state and whose ambition seems to be very interconnected with the mosque and his faith. If he prays 34 times a day, one wonders how much time has he got for the lovely family I met, the African-American family I met, who simply want someone to come and mow their grass. And sometimes I think we need to get away from this kind of news cycle, the media agenda, whatever we're being told by CNN or Fox or whatever the newspaper you read. I don't mind or care. I sometimes think we just need to go and talk to some regular people and ask them what's the one big worry they've got. And this lady, she worries about her son and his safety. So if I may, just before we go into the question and answer session, do keep your questions coming. And the question and answer session will be in the next 2 minutes or so. I'd just like to play you a clip that I had. We shot it at just outside the mosque before I went in a couple of days ago. And just my observations, I think, about the key themes that I believe are impacting on Michigan and my real concerns for you when the Democratic candidate of choice, gubernatorial candidate, does turn out to be Abdel al-Sayed. And when he does turn out to have one of the richest campaigns ever seen in the United States of America, I'd like to say that I was here calling out those warning shots. And if I may, I'd like to share with you this clip from just a couple days ago, and we can play that clip now if that's okay. I'm here in Michigan, and in many ways this place is entirely symbolic of the fight that's ahead. The fight between the traditional values of America, of liberty and freedom, And then here, the largest mosque in America, and the rapidly increasing Muslim population that lives right here in Dearborn. And finally, the old churches, this sense of the traditional faith of America. And the real question for residents here is, will this be the first state in the United States of America that has a Muslim governor? I do feel a sense of real foreboding, actually, and it's absolutely nothing to do with someone's religion. It's absolutely to do with people like me, my children, my daughters, your sons and daughters, and the right of wives to feel that they can go about the place without having to be covered or without being judged for having Western values. Certainly there's areas I go to in London where if I walk through, I would be spat at for not covering my head or my shoulders. Not that I go around with my shoulder out, but you'll be spat at or you'll be called white trash. Certainly in Sweden and in the jungle at Calais, where I spent some time with the migrants there, I was physically attacked for not having my head or my shoulders covered. And I suppose if you think that that's what's being taught right now, and I was told it just 2 days ago in the mosque, that very quickly translates in communities into stuff that they enact themselves. And I don't think that's what Michigan wants for its people. We are 100% viewer supported. If you can help us cover any of the costs of our travel or expenses, please donate at hopkinsworld.com.